Andrew Miller, here we are again,
Yes.
solving the problems of the world
Yes.
because we can and we will. This morning, there's something really top of mind for me this morning, and it is President Jacob Zuma
Yeah.
and his statement, or the statement as reported in the media, because those are two different things, that the miners of Marikana are killers.
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that, Ant?
I think it's just in keeping with how governments and Zuma have been for a while. This idea that to protest in the way that South Africans have always protested is now wrong. So the protesters are always in the wrong. They've always caused the trouble, and they get what is coming to people who protest. So for me, it fits squarely with the vibe of the last 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So no surprise.
No surprise. It's the same thing. Yeah. And I mean, the irony, obviously, that everyone can taste on their tongue is that it's such a Verwoerdian kind of approach to civil order and all of that kind of stuff. But I think that's something that the ANC have to deal with in their own sense of self. But it's the line they've been taking for a while. You guys need to watch it, or we're going to clap you. Yeah. It's quite disconcerting. Yeah.
And as kind of creators and as writers and as kind of, how do we make meaning, or how do we bump up against politics, Andrew?
Well, I don't know. I think one of the issues at the moment is a tendency towards kind of political pantomime, where we're all involved in the sort of lightly ironic aphorism of Twitter and Facebook and intellectual events and so forth, and yeah, I wonder just how incestuously we're all involved, politicians and journalists and so forth, in this little game, Yeah, and I have personal doubts about how effective any of us can be on Twitter or Facebook. And I think artists, if they're going to respond in any way, the response I would love to see would be in music, in poetry, in novels, in plays, rather than kind of coordinated bleats on social media. Yeah.
So there's an artist called Chipape.
Yes.
I don't know if you know him. Yeah. I'm a friend of his on Facebook. I've been looking at his work recently. It's pretty remarkable work, and he's been focusing on Marikana. So what you're saying is people like him are kind of being our collective soul in a way, and kind of recording history and making meaning. Is that what you said? Helping us to understand in a way.
Yeah, I mean, the worry for me is that, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. I do feel that artists need support, So it's one thing to look at his work, or any of the other artists who are doing work on these issues, let's say via the prism of Twitter or whatever, and then off the discussion goes. I feel that if artists are going to be contributors to socio-political society, we need to talk about their work and then go and buy some as well. Because if we are going to genuinely look to artists and poets and so forth to be this voice, then we need to understand that it's a nightmare trying to write a political poem, perform it, and then earn a living. If no one's ever going to pay you and so on, then what society is telling you on the one hand via Twitter and Facebook is that, oh, we love you, you're our social voice, but on the other hand, they're saying you're not that much of a great voice because we're going to go spend money on coffee or whatever, So if we want poets and artists to be our voice, we need to support them by pushing ourselves through their cash register, Otherwise, it's a very pseudo kind of attachment we have to poetry and art and this kind of stuff, Yeah. So if we want artists to be the voice that they can be, then I think we need to support them maybe a little bit more than we do at the moment. I don't think a retweet or a like or anything is support of any real meaning. Yeah, myself.
So Casey Chapape tells me that he's been supported by Cambridge, which I think is quite cool. I mean, that's like quite a cool thing. But I think you raised kind of a really interesting issue there because Andrew, you owned a gallery, you owned Unity Gallery for many, many years, and you closed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you closed it because there wasn't this kind of really supporting. I know from being a friend that there were many, many years of begging and scraping and leopard crawling over glass, the corporate corridors to try and get funding for, yeah. And so I'd like you to talk about that. And I'd also like you to talk about kind of this Facebooky thing, you know, this kind of posting of Charles Bukowski and this kind of what are we doing with social media? It's kind of you know, all this outrage and everything that yeah, and I do it myself. I mean, my God, you know, sometimes I look at myself and I think, my God, am I an outrage machine? And how useless am I becoming? You know,
yeah.
If you can talk about the funding for writers and artists, people like you, and kind of this kind of modern detachment that we have and how it can be more useful. Yeah.
I think, you know, our experience, it's difficult because we were quite naive, you know.
Yes.
And we had ideas about how we should be operating and so on. And so we weren't really well attuned to the game of NGO life. And by the time we realized that we might need to tap into funding sources, it was really too late. And we couldn't really readjust our mindset and the way we did things to get into the NGO space, which is effectively, in my view, a very tightly knit mix of marketing and social development. You know, if you're not going to deliver the goods that companies are looking for in terms of shiny, happy faces and all that kind of stuff, then you're going to struggle to get funding. You know.
So are you saying, Andrew, that the NGO space and the corporate space is kind of pretty inaccessible for emerging artists and emerging writers? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, it depends. You know, if we want to hear the voice of people who are pissed off about this or that, young militant poets and artists who are saying things that actually hurt us emotionally as the recipients, that voice, in my experience, seldom comes through the formal kind of NGO space because no one wants to fund something that doesn't play well on a brochure or that doesn't sound good on Talk Radio 702 or something, you know. So there's a natural filter towards nation positive Mandela style rainbow stuff that an NGO needs to produce in order to have a good relationship with corporates. Otherwise, corporates are going to put their money elsewhere where they know they're going to get a marketing output from this relationship, you know. So the issue I have with that is not necessarily that corporates shouldn't be looking for a positive outlet, but that there's this kind of vacant space where we have a lot of very strong, very interesting voices saying quite touchy things, but we're not going to support those voices, you know, because they're a little bit uncomfortable in the media space. And in my view, those are the voices socially that we need to give oxygen to. You know, we need to hear what young militant poets are saying so that we can understand the kind of emotional dynamic of all the stuff that's going on in the country. But then if we're going to do that as CEOs and marketing type people, then we might need to relook at our idea that corporate social responsibility must have ROI, you know. Yeah, which for me is typically a very specific and typical South African thing, the idea that social involvement is also marketing, you know. It's a very touchy ground, you know. And in my life, there's the formal discussion that happens between artists and funders and so forth, and then there's the shit people say once they've had a few beers, you know. And it's always been really interesting to hear what poets and artists and so forth say about this funded landscape when everyone's had a few drinks, you know. And then there's a lot of kind of sort of bubbling rebellion against this idea that you have to deliver output that pleases everyone, you know. Yeah. So that's my take on the funding environment. It's very tricky, and if you're a polemicist, if you're an angry, violent artist, then you're in for a long ride in terms of getting some kind of patronage, you know. Yeah, then you really do need a patron who's going to buy your shit, you know. Otherwise, you're going to be acclaimed everywhere, but not really fundamentally able to make a living. Yeah. So that's on the funding. Yeah.
Andrew, you can't kind of hit me with this little piece of bait, which is the shit that poets say when they've had a few beers, and not give me a few examples. What are poets saying? What are kind of angry artists saying after they've had a few beers? Don't have to name names, but
well, first of all, there's always the risk that I'm injecting myself into someone else's view of the world and actually just using my idea of artist as kind of a ventriloquistic device to say what I think, which I think happens a lot. But nonetheless, one of the themes that we've always laughed about over the years is the idea that often it looks from the outside like NGOs are set up to create revenue streams for liberal arts graduates, you know, and that might be the first priority of an NGO, is to employ all the managers who often seem to be white ladies with arts degrees and stuff, and then the priority seems to descend to the artists who often can appear to be stuffing in a larger machine. And as long as you can get a shot of an artist with a big smile with a pencil or something, well, that's all he's really required for, you know. That's often what I've heard, and that's often the joke that we've always had as slightly drunk poets and so forth, that we might just be the necessary stuffing in a far larger machine, you know. Yeah, so that's one of the things you hear a lot, you know. Yeah, and it's never raised on a formal level, because if you raise that as a young artist, well, then you put your head above the trenches, and the chances of you getting a nibble on the next kind of pie that rolls in are very small, you know. These are not the things you're supposed to say in a workshop, you know. You're supposed to smile and be grateful for your chance to be this or that, yeah.
And so kind of over the years, you've seen a lot of brilliant poets and artists get sucked up into advertising here. And I'm thinking here of one particularly stellar human being that we both know, who is now kind of in the machine.
Which one is that?
I've forgotten his name. Sorry, forgive me.
Look, there are tons. And you know what bothers me a little bit, or what bothers me a lot, is that there's this incredible talent, but people go on and make lives for themselves, you know. But it just seems a pity to me that there's this really raw young talent in when people are in their early 20s. Unless that talent gets some really clear support, then it goes off into advertising or working in PR, you know. And this applies to artists and poets and so forth as well. It always just seems like to me like a pity. I would love to see the anger and the rage, the literary rage, or, you know, these polemic poems and stuff. I'd love to see that raw spark really given energy and developed, because we could be producing much more really powerful creative content if our young angry poets and artists and stuff got a little bit of support, you know. Yeah, that's my feeling. Yeah.
Now, you're a great lover of history, Andrew.
I am.
You love history. I mean, you really do enjoy history. And you've just made a documentary. Can you tell us about that?
Well, it's just
you were involved in the documentary.
Sorry?
You were involved in the making of a documentary.
Yeah, I've got a very good friend, Stephen Kotzer, who's a historian, a proper historian, and he's always kind of drip fed me knowledge, you know. So, and based on a lot of what I've experienced of history through him, I've explored a bit myself. And then I've worked a lot with Kagiso Nisi over the years, who's a writer, and I've met recently Sidiso Monoheng, and there was this opportunity to put together a docu for Freedom Day for Soweto TV. And so we did that, and we really just looked to contrast the whole vibe of Back to the City, the hip hop event, Freedom Day, what youth are saying and doing, with this one of the hidden stories of South African history, which is Langali Belele. and his arrest and imprisonment and so forth, just as an idea that like history seems to be more and more important in South Africa with regards to youth, and yet most of our youth seem to be completely unaware of the beautiful stories of history. So there's this kind of weird paradox, this idea that history in South Africa is so important, and yet when you ask young people in Gauteng who Langali Balele was, no one knows his name. So we thought that it could be a useful idea to juxtapose youth culture, modern hip hop identity, and so forth with stories of history, speak to some historians about why history matters and that kind of thing, which is what we did. Yeah, it was fun. Yeah.
So I remembered the name of the poet.
Yeah.
And out of all the poets that I saw coming out of your stable, and there's some brilliant people here. The one I really remembered was Nhlanhla Buthelezi.
Yeah.
What came out of his mouth was, for me, I don't know, epic. It was something that I'd never seen before.
Yeah, and Nhlanhla is now a pastor in the church, and he went on to follow his heart in that direction, and he's now in Limpopo. As I understand it, kind of looking after 5 or 6 churches in the area. Wow. And I think his rhetorical ability and his public speaking ability and his poetic ability has taken full shape in the church for him. Yeah, an incredibly powerful guy, an incredibly powerful guy in terms of his ability to speak and think at a young age. I mean, he came up through the Black Sunday sessions in Soweto when he was like 17, 16 years old, Yeah. But at least for me, with Nhlanhla, it's at least from that poet that he has found form in his life, and I think religion and the church, if you're in that space yourself, can be a solid form to locate your art in. I think advertising and PR is a much more dubious sort of end destination for your poetic ability. Yeah. So would that all our poets ended up in the church, and not at ad agencies. Yeah.
Yeah. But let's get back to history, Andrew, and what did history teach us? And we've had a lot of conversations about Hensa, who is forgotten, and I say forgotten, not that he is forgotten by individuals, because of course he's not forgotten by individuals, but he is forgotten by public discourse. We never read about Hensa in our press, or in kind of media scene, or and we don't see our politicians discussing Hensa, who was kind of killed like a dog in a river and chopped up into little bits by the British. His ear, they said, chopped off. Why is that? Why? And what do people like Hensa teach us?
Well, I think if you read history objectively, the first thing you realize is that it's written by old white men, So, and that's one of our essential problems. But when you read history and you dig past that as best you can, for me, it shows us that we're much more interlinked as South Africans in our dodgy behavior than we would like to think, So it's easy, especially apartheid, the whole apartheid idea of the Boer War, that we all separate, So there's black and there's white, there's Afrikaner, there's English, there's Zulu, there's Xhosa, these separate entities. When you read through history in detail, you realize that we were all complicit in all sorts of dodgy shit, And so we're much more bound together as South Africans of all races than we would instinctively think. That's the one thing for me is a really profound realization that you have again and again. And then the other thing for me is like there's so much detail that's been lost about what actually happened. So how were black people taxed in KwaZulu-Natal, and what was that money used for? Is a very important question to me. It's like white South Africans seem not to understand that the whole of Natal basically operated on black tax, on taxing black people, and that money went into running an economy that had failed, and the tax extended all the way as far as to dog taxes, And then so people would hang their dogs by the neck in the tree to show the taxman that they didn't have anything to pay, you know. So these are really important things, I think, to understand when you're going to go raging into Twitter and Facebook and have a magnificently polemic argument about this or that. It astounds me that a lot of the time the people having the arguments about whatever it is seem to not understand some of the basic financial details of our past, you know. So I think history can also, if you have a tendency, like we all seem to, towards virtual debate and so forth, history could equip you as a protagonist, as an antagonist, incredibly, you know. But people don't seem to really like to go there. It's maybe easier just to kind of rest on a few basic assumptions about who we all are and then proceed from there, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And realpolitik and a lot of news brands are very reductive, yeah. And very divisive. So that plays into kind of that, you know, divide and rule sort of thing, you know, because
and reductive and divisive plays quite well in the new media space where you're looking for clicks and links, you know, you're looking for hits, you know, whether you're getting those hits from some kind of shitstorm of pseudo debate or not,
yes.
does it matter? As long as people are arguing about an article and you are the owner of the source of that article, that's what you need in order to survive as a publication. So that I pick up a tendency across publications to kind of throw a little bit of reductive gas onto the fire, because that's how you can become a relevant force. You know, you want to be at the center of the debate, you know. Yeah. Yeah.
From that perspective, I saw there were two quite interesting items on Times Live.
Yeah.
The one is about a young man who had a very long penis, or a very large penis, and had to have it seen to surgically, which was a news item. Yeah, and the doctor, I think, was a Dr. Carrion, which made for an interesting news item. The other interesting news item at Times Live was No Panties Day.
What? Sorry?
No Panties Day. There were a group of people who decided that we need a day, and No Panties Day. So Twitter, I think it was yesterday or the day before, was flooded with pictures of very attractive white women, for the most part.
Without their pants.
Without their pants, yes. And that made the news on Time Live, yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, the problem with all of this is that we're all complicit in it, you know. So as you were saying earlier, what interests me about social media and digital space, and that is, we know technically that you get a little hit of oxytocin every time you get a like or a retweet or something, and that's giving us a little bump emotionally on a brain chemistry level every time we're getting that positive feedback. And we know this is happening. And we also see ourselves clicking on the clickbait, you know.
Yes.
And so intellectually, we can kind of see this dynamic happening. But we seem so powerless when it comes to our own involvement in this thing. So yeah, I think it's complicated for everyone, you know, for journalists and so on. How much are you writing because you really care about the issue at hand? And how much are you hustling for your career? It's actually a very complicated question at the moment, you know. It's a very touchy area to even talk about, because people don't really want to talk about it that much, journalists and editors and so on, because it's very gray at the moment as to what exactly we're doing in this digital space. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the headlines that are biggest, grandest, awesome. Awesome in headlines.
Every subject is an issue and a resolution, you know, or so. Yeah, it seems preposterous, and I think we all realize that it is getting a bit preposterous, but we ourselves are quite preposterous as well, you know, and so it's quite hard to figure out how we're going to, as humanity, find maybe a better way of doing this when we're also compelled by it, you know. So it's one thing to have an intellectual kind of thought leader thing about what's going on, but is there anyone that doesn't get a little kick when they get a new Facebook a friend or a Twitter follower or whatever? I don't know. Yeah, I certainly get a kick. It's weird. I wish I didn't, but I do. Yeah.
Yeah. Your book, Andrew.
Mm.
Do you have it nearby?
No.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to read a bit out of it. Tell us about your book. Tell us about. I've been reading about dubsteps.
Yeah.
Ever since I've got your book, which I have started reading, I've now been reading about dubsteps, which is fascinating. Yeah. So you love history, but your book is firmly rooted in the future. And how did history inform the writing of this book? I mean, when you write, does it give you a bigger sense of perspective or a bigger? How does history inform your writing?
It was weird with dubsteps because it's supposed to be entertainment first and foremost,
Yeah.
But there are obviously dribbles of historical content in the text that are kind of for my amusement or for anyone's amusement, But I really liked the idea once it had started, once there was this character roaming the country that's been empty, of just how vast and kind of, I don't know, like South Africa is a blank canvas again. It's a really intriguing idea because as soon as you empty the country of everyone, then suddenly you can see a lot of the history that's buried by day-to-day life. So I think the idea of Southern African history runs through the book completely. What is South Africa? Who are we? What is Joburg? All these kinds of ideas. Yeah, I think for me personally, when I was writing, my love for history kind of shone through it. But I also didn't want to get too didactic or South African with the thing, because I think there's a South African tendency to preach, politically and socially and so on. And so I tried to stay away as much as I could from any kind of sort of moralizing or giving of lessons to a reader, Yeah.
Yes. Why?
Oh, because it just drives me insane when I see myself doing it, and I do it all the time,
We
It's like
do all this. We do all
there's
this.
there's this there's this arrogant beast that kind of lives within every writer, I think, and it really has to be tamed at times, So for me, it's always been a big effort to get that kind of ego in check, and to try and focus on the reader as much as possible, and to stay away from the kind of South African tendency to treat a novel as a political or a social lesson. Yeah.
Yes. Very good, Andrew.
I don't know.
Thank you.
I think that's important. I think in general, I really like the Kurt Vonnegut idea. In one of his little snippets about how to write or whatever, it's like you need to treat your reader with great respect because their time is very valuable and they're giving it to you, So don't fuck around with your reader, Yeah, and I really like that idea of focusing when you're writing fiction, at least, on what might work for the reader, not what will work for you as the writer. Yeah. It's not all about you. Yeah.
Is that advice for a social media age?
Yeah. I don't know. The social media age is all about you. But yeah, I don't know. It's very tricky too, because in social media, and you see this with corporations and brands, and when you have to work for them in the social media space, you can get caught quite badly trying to give everyone what they want, because unlike with a novel where there's this bridge between you and the reader, in social media land, there's no filter, So if you go around trying to please everyone, then you're going to become a little bit schizophrenic. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know, different kind of milieu in the social media space. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Andrew Miller, for your time.
Thank you very much.
And we shall speak again.
Excellent. Thank you.